What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today we need to take a little bit of a look at the top 10 cards from Keyforge. I've been working up to this video for quite a while. I have shown you the top 10 cards from each house, and I went back to the Facebook group this week. I put up a poll using the best cards from each house, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, help me decide the top 10 cards from Call of the Archons. Huge shout out and thank you to everyone over on the Facebook group. We have a top 10 list. If you want to argue, that's what the comment section is there for, but please do remember my rule. Let's have a full top 10. Also, right, don't be saying this should be higher without saying this should be lower to make room. If you're going to put something up, put something down, and vice versa. Whole bunch of honourable mentions, so let's jump into it. Gateway to Dis. Gateway to Dis is a wonderful card from Dis, shockingly enough. Destroys each creature, yours and your opponent's, gains 3 chains. If you can get a situation where your opponent's got a way better board presence in terms of creatures than you do, it's phenomenal. How about Too Much to Protect? It literally steals all but 6 of your opponent's Ember while giving you an Ember bonus. And if you're playing this, it's almost certainly a Shadow's turn, and you will almost certainly have other cards to steal that one last Ember, so they don't get to forge no matter how much Ember they started the turn with. Lash of Broken Dreams is another great card for stopping your opponent forging a key. It is an artifact, and when you use it, your opponent has to pay 3 more Ember to forge a key. Either they don't forge a key, or they pay 3 more Ember to do so, making it less likely they can forge in the future. Virtuous Works. Also, right, shout out to Sanctum. My top 10 of Sanctum, this won by a mile. And this is the only Sanctum card on this list, and it's an honourable mention. Sorry, Sanctum. Virtuous Works is a very kind of vanilla-y, straightforward card. You play it, you get 3 Ember. That's still pretty good, although the community does not seem to be loving many individual Sanctum cards. We've got Witch of the Eye. There are several witches in Keyforge. Witch of the Eye, when you reap, you return a card from your discard pile to your hand. 3 power, no skirmish, no elusive, might not stay on the field very long, might not ever get to use it, but it's incredibly powerful when you do. Miasma is a lovely Shadows card, gives you an Ember bonus, and your opponent doesn't get to forge a key next turn, they just skip that step. Still means they can forge the following turn, but sometimes slowing them down by a single turn is enough. And the final honourable mention makes me so sad because I really want to put this on my top 10, and I just can't. It's Phase Shift. When you play, you may play 1 non-logos card this turn, and as I've mentioned in a couple videos when we've talked about Phase Shift, it doesn't have to be immediately, you can play it in a little while, as long as it's by the end of your turn. I'm biased because I've got a deck with 3 of these in, and it's so gosh darn good, and that's the thing, we've all got our little biases here, because you cannot construct decks in Keyforge. All we really know is what we've played and what we've played against. This is why I think it was so important that I went ahead and did a poll on Facebook and really got the community thought on this. Several hundred people voted in the poll. It made my life easier. Thank you to all those people. So let's start off in at number 10 with Mother. Mother is a great card. Mother is the kind of card where when I play it against my Keyforge loving friends, they go out of their way to try and take it down now. 5 power creature, but during your draw card step, you refill your hand to 1 additional card. If your deck's got chains on, then you're drawing fewer cards. But then Mother's helping you draw extra cards. And you can play 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 of these in a deck. And then you're playing 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 extra cards during your draw cards phase. It is wonderful and gives you a huge advantage. In at number 9, another logos card, or really a pair of cards, because it's impossible to separate them. Time Traveller and Help from Future Self. Time Traveller gives you an Ember bonus, lets you play 2 cards, and then there's an action where you shuffle it into your deck, ready to play it again and get an Ember bonus and draw 2 cards. Then, of course, we have Help from Future Self, whereby when you play it, you get an Ember bonus, and you search your deck or discard pile for a Time Traveller, and put it into your hand. And these are special cards, they are always paired together. I have seen a treble Time Traveller deck that has free Time Traveller and free Help from Future Self. So if you play Time Traveller, you get an Ember and 2 cards. If you play Help from Future Self, you get 2 Ember and 2 cards. It's a little bit over the top. And then, of course, you can just keep recycling this over and over again. In at number 8, we've got Hunting Witch. Every time you play another creature, you gain an Ember. Now, yeah, it's a 2-power creature with no elusive or any of that, so your opponent can take it down easily, but this is one of those skills which is just there. So you put it down, and then you might play 3, 4, 5 untamed creatures on the same turn, which means you get 3, 4, 5 extra Ember. And that is where the real strength of Hunting Witch comes in. It cannot be terrible. So Witch of the Eye, your opponent can take it out before you ever use it. Mother, your opponent can take it down after you've just drawn 1 card 1 turn. But Hunting Witch, you could conceivably play multiple creatures. I mean, especially if you use something like a Phase Shift to play it down. And then start having a nuts logos turn with stuff like Library Access and more Phase Shift. You can play a lot of creatures in 1 turn. And when you do, you gain an Ember for each of them, which is crazy. In at number 7, we've got Mimicry. Now, I don't have this in any of my decks. Maybe that's why I don't love it as much as a lot of people, but I'm taking your word that it's great. When you play it, treat it as a copy of an action card in your opponent's discard pile. There will be games where your opponent doesn't have any good actions in their discard pile. But then there's going to be a whole bunch of games where they do. Maybe they've got a Phase Shift. So you play it and then you get to play an extra card from one of your other houses. Or maybe you play it and your opponent's got a Virtuous Works. So you just get to gain free Ember. That's the strength here. Yeah, there are going to be games where your opponent doesn't have anything good in their discard to copy. But there are going to be plenty of games where you get to play a card that you shouldn't be able to play because it's not in your deck, but you do because you've got a Mimicry. In at number 6, we've got Arise. It is a discard. You have to gain a chain when you play it, but you get to return each creature of a specified house from your discard pile to your hand. And one of the things that's so phenomenal about this, it doesn't have to be dis. So what you could do is play this on a dis turn, pick up all your dis creatures from the discard pile, and then immediately play them down again. Or you could pick up all your Mars creatures ready for a Mars turn next turn. Or you could pick up all your Logos creatures ready for a Logos turn next turn. There are so many things you could do with this. And you might end up having 4 or 5 really good coming into play abilities, and you're off. Not unlike archiving, one of the things you can do here is cheat yourself into a better turn. So let's say you've got 3 Mars cards in hand, and you're going to choose Mars next turn. Well, all of a sudden, you can play Arise, pick up 5 Mars creatures from your discard, and then you've got 8 Mars creatures in hand, or 8 Mars cards in hand. They might be all creatures, but they might not. And now, all of a sudden, instead of playing 3 or 4 Mars cards, you're playing 8 Mars cards. And ladies and gentlemen, that makes a huge, huge difference here. This is a redonk card, and it's only number 6. Top half of this list probably going to be good. In at number 5, Control the Weak. It gets you an Ember bonus, it's an action card, and you get to choose a house on your opponent's identity card, and they've got to choose that house as they're active on their next turn. Maybe they're playing Dis and you can see they've got something like Lash of Broken Dreams already out, and you don't want them to use it. Maybe you can look at their discard pile and see that they've used 8 cards from Logos and 8 cards from Shadows, but only 2 cards from Sanctum, meaning they're far more likely to have a good Sanctum turn because they're probably going to have more Sanctum cards in hand. Either way, you can have a lot of fun with this. If your opponent uses Arise and gets a handful of Logos cards ready to play down, play Control the Weak. make them pick a different house. Sometimes you're not going to know enough about the state of your opponent's hand, and sometimes you're going to make a bad decision here through no fault of your own, because you're never going to, well, sometimes, but you're rarely going to have complete information. But there are going to be games you just choose a house and your opponent goes, well, what am I supposed to do about that? And those games are going to be fun. In at number 4, Nepenthe. A phenomenal card which has led to some broken combinations. It is an artifact, but it's got an Omni ability, meaning you can use it whichever turn you like, regardless of your active house. You sacrifice Nepenthe and return a card from your discard pile to your hand. So what this does, right, it sits there on your field, and then you wait. And as soon as you play a card that you really want to play again, you sacrifice it and get it back. The best, dumbest use for this is library access. You play library access, hey, now every time I play another card, I get to draw a card. And then you immediately use Nepenthe to get library access back. And you play it, which incidentally will draw you a card. And then every other card you play for the rest of the turn gets you 2 cards. And then you just go nuts. It really is a fairly redonkulous combination, and if you're lucky enough to have a deck with library access and Nepenthe, and the worst thing about this, right, for the opponent, you don't have to draw them on the same turn. You just whack Nepenthe down and you wait. And maybe you're able to get a barehanded, so you stop your opponent doing this, or maybe you're not. And then they're going to have a turn which is going to go dumb. Because if they're drawing 2 cards every time they play one, they're probably going to have a phenomenal turn. In at number 3, I'm pairing them up, Key Charge and CHOTA HALRI. And the reason I'm pairing them up is not because I'm lazy or out of ideas. It's because they're the same thing. Both of them let you lose an Ember and forge a key at current cost. I still find the wording of this really weird. Because surely you've just forged a key at +1 current cost. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. What makes these so good is that you don't have to wait for your key forging turn, part of turn, phase, whatever you want to call it. What you can do is you can go, oh, I'm having an untamed turn. I'm going to reap with these 4 creatures. Hey, I've got 7 Ember. Now I'm going to go and play this. And your opponent wants to play something like Too Much to Protect to stop you forging a key. Your opponent wants to play something like Miasma to stop you forging a key. While they can't, because they never get a chance to stop you. One of the biggest interactions in the game is where your opponent checks at the end of their turn and you go, right, I have got to stop them forging a key next turn. Except these cards don't let you do that. And that's a little bit dumb. In at number 2, and this really should be number 1, except number 1 is even dumber than this, library access. We've already mentioned it a couple of times in passing. It is, by a huge margin, the best draw power we've got. Every time you play a card, you get to draw another card. And the problem is this can get silly. Because if you're able to run out of deck while you're using this, then library access goes back in your deck. It goes to the discard. You keep drawing. Oh, my discard goes into my deck. Oh, I've drawn library access. And then if you play it, you draw 2 cards. And like I've said, Nepenthe can help you here. And you can end up in this weird situation where you're drawing 3 or 4 cards every time you play a card. Because once you're drawing 2 or 3 cards, you're probably going to run through your deck before you run out of cards to play. And the silliest thing is that Logos has got things like Phase Shift and Wild Wormhole, which only help with this. Phase Shift lets you play a non-Logos card. So you play Phase Shift, draw a card. Oh, but now you're allowed to play a non-Logos card, so you play it and you draw a card. Wild Wormhole, you play it, draw a card. That lets you play the top card of your deck, which means you draw another card. This gives you draw power, which is ridiculous. We start our turn generally with 6 cards. Library access, I have personally had turns where I've drawn a dozen cards with library access or more. I have got a deck with library access and free phase shift. And I've had turns where I can play them all. The phase shift alone gets me 6 extra cards. And then, of course, while I'm doing all of that, I'm drawing a couple of other logos cards, which I'm playing, which are then drawing me more cards, some of which are logos. And you just get ridiculous turns. But that's not number one, because bait and switch exists. I told you a moment ago that one of the key interactions in the game is where your opponent checks and you have got to rush to stop your opponent forging a key. Hey, bait and switch is here. If your opponent has got more ember than you steal one, and you keep doing this until your opponent has no more ember than you do. So if they've got an even number of ember, you get half of it and you end up with the same amount. If they've got an odd number of ember, you actually end up with more than they do. If they've got 12 or more ember, this will just flat out give you enough to forge. But this actually punishes your opponent for gaining ember, because the more ember they get, the more you can hurt them with bait and switch, to the point where if you know your opponent has bait and switch in their deck, you have to change how you play the game. Because it's not just that they're stopping you forging a key, which in and of itself is bad enough. It's the fact that they are then getting themselves closer, or maybe even all the way there, to forging a key. And that is a very bad thing for you. This is the biggest, most game-changing card in the entire game. No question. And as much as library access gives you phenomenal draw power, and it does, this is just on another level. And this is the number one card in Keyforge. If we go to the poll that was put on Facebook, we had 117 votes for library access, which sounds like a lot. Except bait and switch had 176. That's a lot, ladies and gentlemen. That is an awful lot. I think it's fair to say that this is the best card. But as I said at the beginning, I would love to know your list. Please tell me a full top 10 list in the comment section. Go nuts. But please do remember the rule, ladies and gentlemen. Be nice, would you? And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk about games, like Keyforge, but also some others. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.